started here. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Steve Villay, and I'm going to be talking about opting out of income tax through negotiated secession. I head up an organization called the Club 75 Alliance, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about that during the course of my talk, but quite a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is just the nature of income tax. What makes it different from other taxes, what makes it so insidious, and why you really would want to opt out. And I think many libertarians just don't fully understand or appreciate this. So, think of this as education. Okay, so I'm going to start with this gentleman right here, John Templeton. He was an investor, he was a philanthropist, a very generous guy. He started the Templeton Foundation, which you may have heard of. It puts out this Templeton Prize every year. Anyway, what makes him interesting for our discussion is the fact that in the 1960s, he moved to the Bahamas and he renounced his United States citizenship. Now, for those who may not be aware, the Bahamas, in addition to having very nice sandy beaches, it is also one of a handful of jurisdictions that has no income tax at all. None. Zero. Nada. Also, for those who may not be aware, the United States taxes its citizens regardless of where they live. So if you move to the Bahamas, as long as you're still a U.S. citizen, the IRS is still going to insist that you pay federal income tax. This is as opposed to most countries like Germany, which tax based on residence. So if you're a German citizen and you don't like income tax, it's enough to move to the Bahamas. And you can keep your German citizenship and you're all good to go, you've opted out. But if you're a U.S. citizen and you want to opt out, you need to renounce your U.S. citizenship, and that's just what John Templeton did. And one of the key messages of our Club 75 Alliance is it shouldn't be just millionaires who get to do this. All right, let's look at one more example. Eduardo Saverin. He was one of the co-founders of Facebook along with Mark Zuckerberg. And so obviously he became a billionaire at a very young age. What makes him interesting for our purpose of this afternoon is that he moved to Singapore. And in 2011, he renounced his U.S. citizenship. Now, for those who may not be aware, Singapore does have an income tax, but it has no capital gains tax. So, if you're an investor like Eduardo Saverin and you get your income from capital gains, then you've effectively opted out. Now, I want to be really clear about what I mean by opting out of income tax. So let me give an example of what I don't know. This is George Soros. A few years back, he made the news because for a period of 3 years, he managed to pay no income tax at all. Now, this was all perfectly legal. He just had no taxable income for those 3 years, which is not unusual for an investor. But he didn't opt out. In my book, at least, he did not opt out. For those 3 years, although he paid no income tax, he still had to file tax returns. He was still subject to IRS rules. He could have been audited at any time. And of course, in the 4th year, he went back to paying income tax. So this is not what I mean by opting out. In contrast, let's look at Eduardo Saverin. From the moment he renounced his U.S. citizenship for the rest of his life, he never has to deal with the IRS at all. That is what I mean by opting out of income tax. And our message is, it shouldn't be just millionaires who get to do that. Okay, now, the case of Eduardo Saverin is interesting because it gives us a glimpse of how senators react when people try to do this. Here's Orrin Hatch, senator from Utah, reacting to the news that Eduardo Saverin has renounced his citizenship. He says, "It always bothers me when somebody renounces his citizenship of the greatest country on earth just to save money, save taxes." Notice the insinuation going on here. It always bothers me. Well, that must mean that Eduardo Saverin is doing something shady or sneaky or not quite right. But he followed the law. He paid all of the taxes that he owed, and and here's another example here. Chuck Schumer is from New York. He wants, in response, he says, basically, I have a status update for him, pay your taxes in full, as if he didn't. He did pay his taxes. He paid the full exit tax he had to pay. He followed the law. He's not in arrears for the IRS. So notice the insinuation here that if you renounce your citizenship, if you try to opt out of income tax, you must be doing something wrong. So we're trying to change that. One other little footnote here. Both John Templeton and Eduardo Severin have publicly claimed that they renounced citizenship for other reasons, not due to taxes. But I want to point out that it's important to take any such claim with a giant grain of salt, because they both, and anyone else who renounces citizenship, has a huge incentive to make up some other reason that they renounce citizenship, and not to admit that it was due to taxes. That incentive is from something called the Reed Amendment, named after this guy, Jack Reed. He's from Rhode Island. This was back in 1996. I'll let you read it, but basically it says if you renounce citizenship for tax reasons, you are not allowed to enter the United States ever again, even to visit friends or relatives. So obviously both John Templeton and Eduardo Severin would like to at least visit now and then. So they have an incentive not to admit that it was due to taxes. This is just a quick chart showing how many people are renouncing U.S. citizenship. Obviously, there was a big spike in 2020. It went over 6,000. It's been up and down, but I would say the overall trend is up. But keep in mind, this is not necessarily for tax reasons. This is just anyone who renounced citizenship for any reason. Okay, so I wanted to do a case study of someone like John Templeton or Eduardo Severin who renounced citizenship, to give you an idea of what kind of tax savings they can get. It's very hard to get detailed financial information about any money. Obviously, they don't want to talk about it because of this Reed Amendment. So I just kind of made up some data based on what little I know about John Templeton. Now, okay, actually, let me say a little bit about the Club 75 lines. Club 75 refers to people whose income is $75,000 or higher. That group, according to the IRS, makes up 29% of taxpayers, but they are paying 90% of all federal income tax. So, briefly, we're trying to encourage them to move to New Hampshire and ultimately push for secession as a way of optimizing income tax. So we have kind of two campaigns going on in parallel. The first campaign is reaching out to people like you saying, please move to New Hampshire and help us make history. The other campaign is reaching out to the American public in general, helping them to get over their fear of secession. Because we're going to go through secession. Okay, so for the first campaign, the message here of Alice is, let's look in detail at how Alice is being hurt by income tax so that you can better understand how it's hurting you too, but just on a much smaller scale. And the message for the general public in our second campaign is what John Templeton did and what Eduardo Severin did and what this fictional Alice is doing. It's not just perfectly legal, it's understandable and even perhaps potentially admirable. Okay, so this fictional Alice is an investor and a philanthropist, very generous, just like John Templeton. I wanted to pick her annual income to be such that the tax savings worked out to exactly $1 million a year. And so that income works out to be $5.7 million and some change. With that, even taking into account a 60% deduction for charitable contributions, which is the maximum, she's still saving $1 million a year by moving to Monaco. Now, we have her moving to Monaco. She could have moved to the Bahamas. She could have moved to any of the dozen or so countries that have no income tax. If it were me, I would choose Monaco. Just a few words about why. Among all the countries that have no income tax, Monaco has by far the best climate. It's about Southern California. More importantly, it has open borders with France, which effectively means it has open borders with the entire Schengen area. So for me, that would be a huge plus. Okay, anyway, so she's a generous person. She wants to take this $1 million a year that she can save, and she wants to redirect it to charity. Now, someone might come along and say, well, Alice, the government does a lot to help the poor, temporary assistance for needy families, the food stamps, which is not going to stand, and so on. So can't you just stay in the United States and pay the tax? And thinking of it as just one more way to help those less fortunate. And she wants to explain why donating to charity is more appealing. Now, as libertarians, we understand this. This is all about the non-aggression principle and so on. But we want to come up with reasons that make sense even to a non-libertarian. So I come up with three. And the first of them is efficiency. You may have seen, if you look in your Form 1040 instructions, near the last page, there's this chart which says where the federal government is spending its money. Now, the piece of the pie there, Social Security, Medicare, and other, that doesn't belong because it's separately funded. Her $1 million is not going to that, it's going to all the other pie slices. So just imagine that pie slice is gone and all the others are increased to 200%. Now, the key point here is that she wants to help those less fortunate. She wants to donate to charity, and if she stays in the United States, then a significant portion of that $1 million is going to go to things that have nothing to do with law enforcement, general government, net interest on the debt. National defense is the big one. She doesn't, Alice doesn't want her charity money used for the war in Iraq. Any of the other wars. Okay, so it's more efficient to just donate directly to charity. Priority. The money in the United States that it is used to help those in need is pretty much all used on American citizens, and it probably should be. But as I'm sure you all know, that is not where the greatest need is throughout the world. And Alice doesn't consider that American poor people are inherently more important or higher priority than people in India or Bangladesh or Haiti or Madagascar or any of the other countries that have extreme poverty. So she would like to set aside a significant portion of her charity to help those countries. And finally, there's just acknowledgement. Charity really is a mutually beneficial thing, and part of what makes it mutually beneficial is that the recipient acknowledges, even if they don't articulate the word thank you, they know that somebody cared enough to make that donation voluntary, and that's what makes it mutually beneficial. If she stays in the United States and pays it as a tax, then the recipients, it's going to come from the government, right? So they're not going to thank anyone, or if they do thank someone, they'll thank their favorite politicians, like AOC, Elizabeth Warren, or something like that. It won't even occur to them to thank someone like Alice, who could have moved to Monaco but chose not to. Okay. Next up, we have our second fictional character, Kathy. She's loosely based on actually myself years ago and other people I know. Actually, my colleagues I'm also with the Free State Ranger. How many people have heard of the Free State Ranger? All right, cool, good. I would say that a great many Free Staters fit this profile here. They might even have higher ratings. Anyway, so she's a software engineer. She works remotely from home. And what we're trying to say is if your income is $75,000 or more, probably you're getting a raw deal from income tax. Probably you would save money by moving to a country with no income tax. So we want to just show how much could she save. We have her moving to Dubai in the UAE. Moving to Monaco is not really an option because you pretty much have to be a millionaire to move to Monaco. And we want to consider not just how much taxes she's saving, but also take into account the cost of living. So in our model here, the cost of living in Dubai is a little bit higher, and we take that into account. So, these are just very rough numbers because it's going to depend on what her cost of living is in the United States. But we come up with several $1,000s a year, let's just put it that way. And also importantly, as her income grows, she's going to save more and more money because there's no income tax. Okay, challenges. Why you might want to think twice about moving to Dubai. If you're anything other than a straight Muslim, you're probably going to feel like an outcast. Actually, just being a woman, there are going to be some things she's not allowed to do. It's not quite as bad as Saudi Arabia, but okay. But the main thing is, being gay is just outlawed. I think it's actually on the books. It's punishable by death or something like that. They don't enforce it, unfortunately. But also, if you're anything other than a Muslim, you're going to feel like you're just not, because that's the official state of religion. The other big thing is, if you want to become a citizen there, it takes 30 years. And so if you want to start saving money, if you don't want to wait 30 years to start saving money, what you're probably going to have to do is become a citizen somewhere else first, like Portugal, and then move to the UAE. Now, you can do it; it's legal, but it's just awkward. You go to Portugal, live there for the requisite number of years. It's, I think it's 6 years to become a citizen of Portugal, and then once you have your citizenship, your passport, at that point you can renounce your U.S. citizenship, and then you move to Dubai. It's legal, but it just feels awkward. It feels like you're being a little bit dishonest to approach it. Okay, so this is an important chart here I want to leave up here. This really illustrates the nature of income tax. What we're showing here is that income tax benefits the majority. So what we did was we took someone from the 5th percentile, someone from the 10th percentile, 15th, 20th, and so on up to the 95th percentile. So 19, hopefully, typical income levels. And we estimated what their taxes would be based on some assumptions. And then we estimated what it would be for a sales tax raising the same amount of total revenue. And what we find is that, at least in this model, the cutoff point is approximately 75,000. So if you're above 75,000, then you're going to be paying more on income tax than you would on sales tax. And if you're less than 75,000, the reverse is true, at least under this model. So what I want to let me point out one other thing. It's not just the United States that has income tax. It's essentially every country other than, there's a handful of them, but every major country and almost all of the minor countries have income tax. So evidently income tax is very popular. So, and yet of course it's very difficult to, expensive to administer. You've got to get all employers involved. Having people fill out their tax form, many people don't want to take the time to do it, so they hire someone like H&R Block to do it. So it's expensive to administer, and yet it's very popular all over the world. And what I want to suggest to you is the reason for that is that if you look at an income tax pretty much anywhere in the world, and you compare it to any other kind of tax raising the same amount of total revenue, you're going to see a chart that looks about like this. There's going to be a majority that are paying less under income tax, and a minority paying more under income tax. And that minority is approximately close to people whose income is smaller. So let's look at a little bit of what makes that true. Income tax can be progressive, and in fact in the United States it is, in a way that no other tax can. The first 10,275 is taxed at 10%, then up to 41,000 it's taxed at 12%, and then starting at 41,000 it jumps to 22%. So this gives a break, if you will, to low income people, and it helps to make it so that income tax, particularly a progressive one like this, benefits the majority. So, do we have any yogis in the room? Anyone practice yoga? Okay. So you probably know that it's not just about the poses and asanas. There's a whole philosophy. And one of the things we're taught is to observe without judgment. And basically this just means look around at the world you're facing, whatever pain you're suffering, but not judge it, not say that it's unbearable. Just be clear about what it is. So in this particular case, where income tax benefits the majority. We just want to just accept that and not try to judge whether it's a good or bad thing. And just think about what it implies. So, yeah, so what this means is stop trying to sell these guys on getting out of the income tax because they're not going to like it. Focus on getting these guys below 75, or really anyone who wants to opt out of income tax and also wants to opt out, and also is willing to opt out of positive rights, to concentrate in New Hampshire and then push for secession. And okay, so we talked about income tax and positive rights. In a little bit, I'm going to talk about what positive rights are, but what I'm saying here is that they go together. If you're going to opt out of income tax, to do it in a sustainable way, you also need to opt out of positive rights. So here we go. The United Nations, they had, back in the 60s, I believe it was, they were chartered to come up with a Declaration of Human Rights, and they ended up coming up with 2 covenants. The first of them deals with negative rights, and the second deals with positive rights. So basically what makes the definition almost of a positive right is that it costs the government money, whereas a negative right doesn't. So the negative rights are things like freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of association, and so on. It doesn't really cost the government any money, they just have to not infringe on those freedoms. Whereas to provide adequate food, clothing, and housing for someone who can't afford it, it costs money. So we're going to want to keep the negative rights and we're going to want to opt out of positive rights, and that's how we're going to be able to not have an income tax in our country. So now let's just take a look at the countries that have no income tax. Here's a list of them, and we want to see what's different about them. Now remember, in our 2 campaigns, we have the campaign reach out to you guys and encourage you to move to New Hampshire. For you, the message here is understand what's different about these countries so that you can better understand income tax. For the other campaign, reaching out to the American public, our message here is, look, we've done our due diligence. We understand that secession is chaotic, it's stressful, and we wouldn't do it if there were any reasonable way for us to do it through immigration. But we looked at the immigration options, we looked them over carefully, and none of them are suitable. So that's kind of the message. So first thing, believe it or not, they're not very democratic. There's only a handful of absolute monarchies left in the world. A fair number of them have no income tax. There's Brunei, there's Oman, and each of the United Arab Emirates is an absolute monarchy. And if you think about it, the more democratic a country, the harder it is to avoid an income tax because income tax benefits the majority. So vote for to bring in an income tax. High exports per capita. Let's just take an example of the United Arab Emirates. Obviously, what they're exporting is oil. So basically, every man, woman, and child in the United Arab Emirates is exporting an average of $41,000 worth of stuff, which is mostly oil. So that provides kind of like, it's almost like free money for them. It reduces their need for welfare, and hence it reduces their need for an income tax. The one exception, by comparison, the United States exports per capita is only around 7,600 and some change. So all of these, except Vanuatu, is higher than Vanuatu is kind of a class by itself. I would really like to understand it better. It doesn't fit any of the usual profiles of the country with no income tax. Okay. Residents with high income. As you may know, a third of the residents of Monaco are millionaires. So obviously they don't need welfare. And they are the kind of people who would want an income tax. And I believe, I don't have any hard data, but I believe many of the other jurisdictions here, particularly the British overseas territories, they have a fairly high concentration of They tend to at least, well, obviously the major countries all have income tax. The exceptions here are the ones shaded in yellow. These 4 countries are basically the only 4 that are large enough to be big enough for what we want to do. We want to allow millions of people to opt out of income tax. There's Club 75, according to the IRS, has 45 million people in it, give or take, in the United States. So we figure a few million of them would want to opt out of income tax, and more throughout the world, obviously. So we're talking about a big migration, and the only 4 that are big enough to be able to accommodate all those people are these people: Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, and they all kind of have the same problem, which is that they have oil exports, and that's how they make it work. They're also not gay friendly. They're not, if you're again like the UAE, if you're anything other than a Muslim, you're probably going to feel out of place, and it takes a very long time to become a citizen. But the main problem is their no income tax policy works for the wrong reason. It works because of oil exports. We want to build a country where the no income tax policy works for the right reason, which is that we have opted out of positive rates. Okay, many of you are familiar with the Free State Project. I want to say, okay, a couple of comments here. Up until just like last year, their tagline was "Liberty in our lifetime," and the statement of intent featured prominently on the website. This is what you were agreeing to when you joined the Free State Project. Notice there, I'll just read this item 2 there. I will exert the fullest practical effort toward the creation of a society in which the maximum role of government is the protection of individuals' rights to life, liberty, and property. There's a name for that size of government. It's minarchy, and it also is known as the night watchman state. In my opinion, the Free State Project has had a messaging problem for quite some time. It is based on the fact that they are officially neutral about secession. And I think many people reading this will say, well, if this is your stated goal, you want to keep this. How can you hope to achieve that without secession? How can you, as long as you're still governed by all the various federal agencies, the FDA, the SEC, IRS, obviously, how can you are obviously nowhere near your stated goal of anarchy. So either this isn't literally your goal, or you don't understand what it takes to get there. And either way, I can't really take you seriously. So we're going to fix this problem by not being neutral. We're going to say yes. Secession is an essential part of our plan. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about Club 75 lines. This is our tagline: opting out of income tax. It's not just for millionaires. So we're going to combine 5 key ideas. Concentration of minority wealth. That's what the Free State Project does. They've already done it well, and we're just going to be their allies in that. Secession. We're going to say yes, secession is a key part of our plan. Okay, focus on opting out of income tax. There's a number of secession groups here in New Hampshire, and I would say most of them are chomping at the bit to secede. And I've been trying to say, let's wait a little bit. I want to just say a few words about why. Many of the people involved in the secession efforts say the federal government is just evil. Anything is better than being associated with them. And I'd like to say, well, believe it or not, the federal welfare state that you see, the war on drugs and all of that, is not really all that different from what you see in Germany or in Canada or Australia or something. You see pretty much the same picture everywhere. And if we seceded now in Hampshire, eventually we would go down this path. And it's because eventually the people of New Hampshire would say, let's have an income tax. Let's vote on whether to have an income tax. And they would, so they would, with the mixed population mix that we have, they would say a majority of them would benefit from an income tax. So eventually it would come back, and once an income tax comes in, you get the welfare state, you get pretty much the same stuff all over. So it's like meet the new boss, same as the old boss. I want to have a secession that gets past that, and the only way to guard against this is by having, let's go back to another. You want to have a high concentration, very high concentration of those people who, if they're not in Club 75, they at least want to opt out of income tax and are willing to opt out of consequence. That's really the key thing. We need a concentration of those people to guard against an income tax coming in. Here we go. So this is our analog of the statement of intent. It's quite lengthy, but it's saying what needs to be said without going any further. So the main thing is you are saying you don't consent to income tax, and because of that you don't consent to the by the federal government. We're ultimately going to make an argument about consent of the government. 2 and 3 are just kind of elaborating, emphasizing that it's still perfectly legal for you to do that. Item 3 is worth a little elaboration here. Some people have attacked us by saying, well, if you're for secession, then you're violating your oath to support and defend the Constitution. And so we're going to say, well, we're going to go, say this at the beginning, we're going to propose a constitutional amendment to allow secession. Because we're going that way, we're acting legally, so yes, we are supposed to defend the Constitution. 4 is important. It's saying, it's saying that you are willing to opt out of consequence, and you don't expect the government of New Hampshire to provide free food or even subsidized food. And point 5 is really important to keep in mind. That means that if you become unable to provide, if you become destitute, there's always a risk that voluntary charity might not be enough to keep you alive. So there's a risk of death here, and you need to keep that in mind. You may consider the risk is very low, and that's fine. But just be aware of it and just really wrap your mind around the fact that this is what you're agreeing to. It's kind of like you're engaging in a dangerous activity, bungee jumping or something. So this is a waiver or something. Okay, here's our proposed constitutional amendment. You all are familiar with Brexit. Brexit was made possible by something called Article 50. That's one of the European Union, that's part of the treaty. And Article 50 is what allowed Brexit to happen. And our proposed constitutional amendment is almost taken verbatim from that. It basically says that if a state wants to secede and the federal government no longer has the consent of the government, then they just have to state that there's a procedure for them to tell the president we are seceding, and from that point on, they're supposed to negotiate. But if 2 years go by and they haven't reached an agreement, then they just secede anyway with no agreement. And that would be chaos. So nobody wants that. So the theory is both sides, both the federal government and New Hampshire, have an incentive to negotiate in good faith. Okay. We want to move enough people into New Hampshire so that we get this picture. We are 67% of the voting population. That means we need to get people by the hundreds of thousands to move to New Hampshire. And hopefully by saying we're going to follow the legal path, people will be willing to do that. Right now they might say, well, this free state not really wants to do things that aren't quite legal, so I'm reluctant to do that. Anyway, so the rest of the population, like the 33%, are what we're calling loyalists. Now, in any secession, there are loyalists. Of course, in 1776, there were loyalists about 400,000 loyalists who remains loyal to the British Crown, and we're going to treat our loyalists much better than those loyalists were treated. Okay, so what we want to do is make, say, whatever positive, bear in mind that these people have not opted out of positive rights. So we want to grandfather them into the positive rights that they have now in New Hampshire. So that's the New Hampshire part of welfare, public schools, obviously. And if they say, I just can't stand this libertarian paradise, for me it's a libertarian hell, I just want to move somewhere else, we will pay for their relocation. So the goal here is that nobody, not even the loyalists, are any worse off as a result of the secession. To make that happen, we need to talk about the benefits that are provided by the federal government. Here's a list of them. There's quite a bit, and so what we want to actually do is ask the federal government to participate in this grandfathering and to treat them more or less like U.S. residents, so that they're still eligible for TANF and SNAP and even income tax credit. So the rationale here is these guys are still paying U.S. income tax. Don't they deserve some benefits for the income tax that they're paying? And of course, the federal government would need to provide these benefits anyway, if we immigrated to Dubai, for example, or if they moved to some other state, Maine, Vermont, Massachusetts, whatever. So it seems reasonable that they should provide the benefits while they're still in New Hampshire. Okay, secession. Hopefully you have all heard about this poll that was done by the UVA Center for Politics. It's made it clear that secession is much more, much less of a dirty word now than it was. 20 years ago, if you just talked about secession, people were crazy. But now, they're more likely to say, well, okay, I'm still listening, but make it good. So this survey that was done back in 2021 showed that about half the country is open, that they're at least somewhat agree that it's worth talking about secession. So that's good news for us. So we just need to kind of win them over to New Hampshire secession. Almost okay. I'll just wrap this up a little bit. So, how does one negotiate for secession? What do we have to negotiate with? Well, we don't initially want to appeal to the government directly. We want to do this campaign, reaching out to the American people, as I said, and also to some extent reach out to the international community to help put pressure on the federal government to negotiate in good faith for secession. So there's two approaches that we're taking here, two reasons that we're pushing for why even a non-libertarian should push for this. The first is just consent of the government. Hopefully that means something. It's in the Declaration of Independence. Assuming that still means something, that should mean that if you no longer have the consent of the government in New Hampshire or in any other state, it's called uncivilized to continue government. And the other thing is just, it shouldn't be just millionaires who get to opt out of income tax. What they want to do, what people like Alice are doing, is perfectly reasonable, even admirable. And it shouldn't be just millionaires who get to do that. And if you say no to secession, effectively what you're saying is only millionaires can opt out of income tax. Because the options for immigrating to other countries where you don't have to be a millionaire are so limited, really not very good. I imagine this scenario going on around the country. In some school, the teacher says, hey, boys and girls, what's great about America is we govern based on the consent of the governed. And someone raises their hand and says, what about New Hampshire? Hopefully that will put some pressure on them to say, let's think about this. All right. I will take some questions.
why not just go the route of amending the Constitution with the idea that maybe states like California can adopt their socialist type platforms, and they can get what they want, and New Hampshire can get what they want. In other words, take a lot of the things that are done by the federal government and throw them back to the states. Hopefully.
Yeah, so basically the federal income tax, you just, okay, the states, it's up to each state to have their own tax whatever they want to do.
Right.
That, I'm all for that, but
that seems easier than secession. Plus, you're offering a kind of a carrot to those states who want to go the other way, who the Constitution limits them right now from imposing the socialist state that they would want. So you'll get agreement with states that want to go the other way.
Do you think that it's easier to get people to agree to get rid of the federal income tax and replace it with a bunch of individual state income taxes? Interesting. I would have to say that sounds harder.
Well, I was a tax attorney for the IRS.
Okay.
I wrote regulations.
Okay.
And I think it properly presented, it's pretty easy to make the case that the worst form of taxation is an income tax. That you can make it from 4 or 5 different angles. It's any type of consumption tax would be better. And by the way, nobody considers. Are you familiar with Henry George's land tax, which would probably be even better? But anyway, I'm just saying that I don't think it's that hard. It would be that hard to get people to say we don't want a federal income tax. I think that's the easiest tax to get people against. It was Karl Marx who was the biggest advocate, earliest advocate of an income tax.
Plank 2 of the Communist Manifesto.
Yeah, and but the reason is he was honest about it, because it's the tax that redistributes income better than any other form of tax, particularly if it's a progressive tax. The other point that you didn't try to make a distinction, there's a big difference between an income tax with progressive rates and one that would just have a flat rate. I don't like that tax either, but it's far, far better than the progressive. When you consider that something like 5% of the highest income earners in this country pay something like 65% of all the income tax. And when you consider that 46% of the lowest income earners as a group pay no income tax as a group. In other words, they get some pay tax, but the credits that they get. I mean,
I want to get to other. Let's talk after. It sounds like we have some discussion. Yes, sir.
I know it's the case with Bahrain, UAE, and Qatar, but is it common that in many of these countries without income tax, that most of the residents were not actually born in that country, and that they moved there, and in many cases are not citizens? Are they mostly non-citizens in many of those countries?
I don't have any hard data, but I believe what you're saying is correct. Yes.
Hi, thanks. So I live in Texas, and obviously there's a big secession movement there as well. And recently, there was sort of an affidavit that came out with our commissioner's court that they want the other commissioners to sign about sort of, being in support of secession. And so I'm on a political accountability pact board of directors, and we were kind of, talking about it, because some people are sort of for it, and some people are like, I don't know. And one of the questions I got brought up, especially in Texas, because there's a lot of people who are like in the military and have worked for the government. A lot of those old timers and retirees have, federal pensions and health care and vets and that kind of thing. And in Texas, you have, tax rebates if you're, disabled vets, and your taxes are frozen, and there's all these things. But a lot of that benefit comes from the federal government for those people. So the question came up, and I don't know the answer to it, so I thought maybe you would have some insight, is that what happens to those people if you decide, okay, I want to be, living in the nation of New Hampshire, the nation of do I forfeit my federal pension?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I would ask, what happens now? Forget about New Hampshire, which may or may not happen. What happens now if somebody moves to, not even Monaco, just Salem?
Right.
And they renounce their U.S. citizen, do they still get to keep their federal pension? I would think the answer is yes, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I would think you get to keep it because you don't.
Yeah, it's like a contractual obligation.
It's not like Social Security. With a federal pension, you have a contractual obligation. And so the fact that it's with the federal government doesn't make any difference.
Any other questions?
Like,
All right, thank you all for coming.
So